Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the March meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee at Sheffield City Council. I now get to read the blurb. Housekeeping. We still have social distancing restrictions, and we do try to get people to wear masks when they are moving around the town hall. There's also hand sanitizer available in the corner by the door. The toilets are outside on the corridor, male that way, female that way. We're not aware of any planned fire alarms, so if it does sound, please leave and make your way out of the back of the building. The front of the building currently isn't open. There's major cleaning works going on. So I think just follow the green signs. We have got some remote participants on screen. So if a remote participant wishes to speak, they should indicate by using the raised hand function, and I will ask people to prompt me if they see it and I don't. We're going to move now to quick introductions of everybody in the room. I'm Councillor Sioned Meyer Richards. I'm the chair for today's meeting. Alison.
Alison Howard, independent co-opted member.
Councillor Mohammed Maroof, Crooks and Crosspool.
Councillor Josie Pashek from Hillsborough.
Councillor Simon Clement Jones, Beach of Greenhill, and Deputy Chair of your Audit Committee.
Ben?
Councillor Ben Curran, Councillor for Walkley, and he's asked me to speak on his behalf. This is my nephew Stephen, who's just here shadowing me because he's interested in finance.
Councillor Angela Ardencio, Councillor for Broomhill and Charleville.
And the officers who are with us this evening, I'll start here.
Eugene Walker, Acting Chief Executive.
David Hollis, Assistant Director, Legal and Governance.
Paul Taylor, Head of Customer Services.
Linda Hunter, Senior Finance Manager, Internal Audit and Risk Management.
Dave?
Dave Phillips, Head of Strategic Finance. And I've got colleagues here, Claire Sherritt, Senior Finance Manager from Strategic Finance, and Jane Welby, Head of Accounting.
Jay Bell, Committee Secretary.
And our lovely assistant in the front who makes all the IT work. Right, have I missed? You haven't got microphones, so do you want to? Okay. Okay. Thank you everybody for coming this evening. And welcome, Stephen. I think by the end of this you'll want to be a Director of Finance in local government. This is our aim. If you don't say that at the end of the meeting, we're going to be really disappointed. No pressure, okay, Stephen? So, did somebody say something? Or just me? Hang on. Right, so our next item is apologies.
Chair, receiving an apology from Councillor David Barker.
I don't think there's anybody else. Thank you. Exclusion of the press and public. We have no items which require this to happen. Item 4, declarations of interest. We have none that haven't already been declared. So item 5, minutes of the previous meeting. As always, I'll go through them for corrections and then for any matters arising. Okay, so page 9, page 10, page 11 and page 12. So can I accept these as a true record of the meeting? Thank you. And now we'll just go through for any matters arising, page 9, page 10, page 11, and I think on page 11 I have to read a correction. Is that right, Jay? So, on item, sorry, the item which was about the annual standards report, at the previous meeting a report was submitted on the annual standards report. Within this report, at section 5, complaints, it was reported that there were no open reports. The report had actually amalgamated both the open and closed or concluded matters at a point in time, and a complaint was included as one of the two cases in the refer to consideration subcommittee with an investigation section. This is not actually correct, as one complaint is still currently at an information gathering stage. So a query was raised directly by the complainant concerned after the meeting on the 24th of Feb that this case was still ongoing. The acting chief exec and the assistant director legal and governance have both been in communication with the complainant to explain the situation and that the error would be corrected at the next meeting of the committee on the 24th of March. So I think I should have read that just before we said, although I think the minutes were correct at that time. Angela.
I just have one matter arising.
So can we just accept the amendment, which isn't an amendment, it's a sort of a matter arising amendment? Thank you. Okay, Angela.
At point 515 on page 11, letter B, I am not aware that we have that has been circulated by the monitoring officer. So I wonder whether we could have that at some point.
Dave,
Yeah.
that one.
I'll pick that up.
Thank you very much. And page 12. Okay, that completes the minutes. So our next item is the annual audit report 2021. So this is where we have our guest stars on screen who will go through the report for us. Unless, do you start it, Dave?
Thank you, Chair. I won't talk for very long because this is the Auditor's report rather than the officers. It's important they talk to it. Just to say, this is a report that concludes the audit for the year. It summarises position on the audit opinion. It says we've got a clear opinion. There are no other matters they need to discuss. What is new for this year is that there's a section on the value for money commentary, which is a new thing this year for those of you that know and love auditors' reports, that talks through our financial standing and ongoing concern and that side of things. But it's important that I let the auditors talk to you, not waffle on. So I'll hand over to Janet and Dan now.
Thank you, Dave. I can't read your name labels from here, so can you introduce yourselves and then speak, please? Thank you.
Absolutely, no problem, Chair. So it's Janet Dawson, the audit partner, and I'm joined by Dan Spiller, who is the audit senior manager. Sadly, Hayley can't be with us today because of a family bereavement, and apologies that we're not with you in Sheffield, but actually we're testing your new technology and finding it to be very, very effective from our perspective. So that's great. Thank you. I'm hoping that you can hear me clearly.
Absolutely, like you're in the room with us.
Super, that's great. So as Dave has explained, this is the annual auditors report. It's a slightly different format than from what you've seen in previous years because the NAO's Code of Audit Practice has changed the name of the document and then also changed some of the the contents, as Dave has explained already. But what it does do is it summarises the outcome of all of our work for the 2021 audit. And you'll note that I think since we last saw you at a meeting, we have provided our audit opinion and it is clean on the financial statements. There's no exceptions reported either in our value for money work, so our consideration of the arrangements that you have in place to achieve value for money. What I thought would be most useful is if I just direct your attention to the VFM commentary, because as Dave says, this is new for this year, and it sets out really, hopefully, certainly what officers understand in terms of the arrangements in place around financial sustainability, governance, and the use of information for making decisions. But it's the first time probably that an external auditor has set that out clearly for your taxpayers, your citizens, to be able to have a look inside and understand what those arrangements look like. And so that's the purpose of the commentary, really to set out what we see as the arrangements and how those operate. So that's from page 26 in the document. And I thought it would be worth just taking your attention to three particular areas where we talk about issues that we've looked at pretty closely in the last year. So the first one is financial sustainability on page 30. And at the start of our audit, you'll remember that we said there may be a risk of weakness in this area, given the challenges that the organisation is facing. So what we've done is we've had a really close look at the arrangements in place and are satisfied that those are satisfactory, that they were working through 2021 and up to the point of reporting, in fact, at the end of this month, that those were sufficient, those arrangements, to manage the risk and the financial sustainability within the organisation. The next point that I go to is page 35, where we talk about Westbar, and then also page 38, where we talk about Heart of the City. And you'll remember again from our planning report, we said we want to have a look at those, the way in which decisions are made around those particular investments and the support that the council give in those particular developments, to make sure that the decisions are being made appropriately and that the governance arrangements around those are robust. And again, in both areas, we've done some additional work to look at those arrangements and are satisfied that they are indeed robust and appropriate to manage risks in those areas. So the final point would be on page 40, where we have made one recommendation, which is that given the ongoing financial challenges that the council faces due to the financial challenges, the uncertainties about funding, and as we see all around us, you know, the effects of inflation, you know, how the local economy is going to continue to operate, that you actually need to make sure that you're maintaining robust forecasting and budgeting arrangements in place to be able to manage that challenge. So it's not that you haven't got it, but we're saying as your external auditors, we think that that will continue to be a risk for you, and therefore you'll need to continue to have robust arrangements in place. That was what I was going to talk you through on that. Happy to take any questions, and Dan will be my able assistant on any of those.
Thank you very much. I'm actually going to ask Eugene to say something first, just on page 40, about the making sure that we do have robust forecasting and budgeting. If you'd like to comment on that as well, please.
Of course I will. Perhaps partly with my old hat on, although, oh, by the way, the Director of Finance is watching us on live stream, so he's keeping an eye on us, even though he can't be with us.
You didn't tell me that.
I've just told you, just in case. So he's watching, can't be with us.
Janet's absolutely right, and it's really helpful and supportive to have external audit kind of reflecting on our position back to us, and we do keep regular conversations around that. I think we're well conscious of forecasting. I mean, if we look back to last year, we reported the in-year position last year early to members. We were quite explicit about that. We've talked a lot about the fact that if you look at other councils that have had financial difficulties, there's quite often a compounding of financial difficulties with the governance issue where they don't acknowledge they've got a problem. We've acknowledged we've got a problem. We've talked to the external auditor and partners for some time about the increasing difficulty each year cumulatively, and in May last year we were early excuse me, to report publicly that we got that position. We will absolutely maintain that. I know the finance team have already started work on analysing the delivery of savings that we've only just approved at full council because those were in train. They'd already done work on deliverability of those. That's already been reported to the Office of Performance and Delivery Board. We've got that the Director of Finance is a key member along as well as the Social Care Directors, which is where most of our pressures will be. We are following up on that, and we will be bringing early reports to the members as soon as possible, bearing in mind the electoral cycle. So I think we're well aware of it, and it's a point well made, but it needs to keep being made. So please carry on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eugene. Questions? Don't disappoint me, Maroof. Councillor Maroof, would you like to speak?
Thank you very much, Chair. I was trying to be a bit reluctant today about asking questions on subjects that I've been asking questions on for quite some time. But you've got rid of my shyness there, so thank you. I'm still, I welcome regeneration in the city. May I predicate by saying that right at the beginning? And I think it's good that the city takes an initiative in doing that. But in so doing, I think I've also asked questions previously of the external auditors around West Bar in particular. And the phrase that still sort of irks me a little bit is the council undertook to sign the lease for subletting effective November 2023, when the building is expected to be completed. In effect, the council guaranteed the lease of the building subject to a number of conditions being satisfied. Basically, what we've done there is we've become the tenants of the developer. If nothing else ever happens, then we will still be liable to pay that rent. And looking at what the marketplace is doing, and I'm not saying that I disagree entirely with the valuers that have actually done this and the report done by the surveyors, but I would have quite a debate with them on this subject, if I may, in terms of the demand for office space in this city, which I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday saying there is quite a lot of surplus office space already in the city, and as a result of COVID, I think that percentage may increase year on year. And when we've undertaken to sign a lease for 100,000 square feet, and I did the numbers last time, but I can't remember them, Chair, it still concerns me that we have got into this situation, and I can understand why we got into this situation. Don't get me wrong, I do understand that. But it does create a slight uncertainty for the local authority as we move on with this particular project, because we will still be liable for all that. And I accept what the auditors are saying. Yes, the reports have been done, they've been signed by a chartered surveyor. It shouldn't be argued against, but many a times some of these things can be argued against because it's an opinion at the end of the day. It's not science. And therefore, I'm just reiterating my position that I still feel very concerned about that. And also concerned about the heart of the city as well, in terms of the numbers that are being, we've sort of identified that we're going to be liable for, especially when we're going to be talking about SEND later on in this committee, where the need for money is even greater. There is a balancing act to be done. That's what politics is about, and I accept that as well. But clearly, there is an issue there, and I'm glad the auditors picked it up last time. It's on there as a key item, and presumably it will be continue to be monitored as we move forward. But having signed the lease, I think we can't get out of it now either, can we? So I shall just register my concerns, really, at this stage. The only other thing that I was going to talk about was, and that was also something to do with valuations, in fact, page 43, investment property valuations. It seems to be quite it's an issue around advertising space, I think, and the auditors quite rightly have picked up the fact that we, if I read this correctly, we didn't pick up the advertising space revenue, which amounted to 2.4 million or something like that. So that was quite an error to pick up on the system, but a positive one, in fact, if that is what we're getting. So not all negative, Chair. So there is a positivity to it as well. And the other one that I can't remember what the number was anymore, but it was flagging up liabilities as we move forward, in particular where the local authority is a tenant, where the local authority is a tenant of a property. Clearly, there is also issues around dilapidations and cost factors, which the local authority would have to enter into once they surrendered the lease. and it should be that we should be a little bit sharper, and I think the auditors have picked up on that. So again, I welcome that, because sometimes we're left with huge amounts of dilapidations claims, and you just have to look at John Lewis, where I think we've got 20 or 30 million pounds of liabilities in terms of a building that we've taken back from John Lewis. So the numbers are quite significant when we talk about these things. But at this stage, as I said, the remit of this committee is to express concern, not change the decision. So I shall rest there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Oh, Simon.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. If I kind of ask a question on, it's not really got a page number as such, but it's obviously, you mentioned in the report that obviously we managed to balance the books this year, just about, and obviously it's going to be tight for the next 12 months. I'm really wondering if you could let us know kind of what areas you think we should be looking at to start off with, and obviously the areas of most risk in terms of hopefully being in the same situation in 12 months' time, so that you know, we are a going concern, as I say, in terms of what the areas that could cause a problem over the next 12 months. And just on page 44, in terms of members' interest, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this, or perhaps somebody else. I'm just wondering if that was a system failing, or a training, or something like that. So if it's something that we need to look at in terms of, from a member perspective, to make sure these kind of things don't happen. Thank you.
So if I take the point about areas of risk, I mean, I think there are, as Eugene's already talked about, the pressures within the social care expenditure block are going to be significant, I think, and will continue to be so. And those are the ones that were really underpinning and driving the main area of financial challenge. I think from our perspective, we will be looking across your budget, where your savings plan is. So I'm keen to understand the outcome of that progress monitoring on the savings plan, because we will be driven by where you've decided to make those savings, how you've gone about them and how effective they are. We'll also be looking at the overall arrangements that are in place to continue to monitor and effect savings and to achieve your balanced budget. Just in terms of going concern, clearly what we're looking at is where those pressures manifest in terms of your liquidity over the 12-month period after you've reported, and also how you use your headroom on borrowing, whether short-term or long-term, but also your reserves, to be able to continue to maintain that financial sustainability position, so that you don't run out of cash, but similarly you're not running down your reserves or having to borrow more to manage your liquidity position or your longer term spending. So those are all the different factors, Simon, that we'll be taking into account as we look at that, but we'll be really driven by where are you planning to budget, what are the pressure areas, and then how effective are you being in terms of monitoring those and managing them. Just in terms of the member interest, I don't know, Dan, whether you want to come in on that one.
Thanks, Janet. So I think the key part to the finding that we've got on members' interests is that people haven't declared interests that have then been picked up through our audit work. Now, it was actually only 2 days ago I was having the debrief with the finance team, and they were discussing with me how they were going to act on some of these findings that we've reported for 2021, as we would normally be saying move into 21-22, but we're actually only a week away from the end of that financial year. And I suppose there's a bit of an expectation gap on these things. So whereas the finance team can only include what they've been kind of communicated from members in their annual declarations, I suppose our point is that if we can perform a check that identifies undisclosed related party, then so could the council. So I suppose it's to prevent such a finding coming again next year, and we've discussed with finance what we did to identify that, and I suppose it's therefore moving that process more in-house to ensure that finance are aware of any declarations of interest that may or may not have been declared by members, and therefore can have a tighter rein on whether there could potentially be any transactions associated with those declarations that needed to have been captured.
Thank you. Have you got any further comments on that, Simon?
I mean, I think having heard that, I think I may have a recommendation, but not kind of off the top of my head at this point. So perhaps come back to me.
Can I ask our Eugene again, I guess, or is it Audit? Who do I ask about that issue about declarations of interest by members? Because it sounds like we're missing something.
Well, yeah. See if Dave can do that. Can you also just clarify something else? Because sorry, Ruth was asking about the.
Hang on.
Yeah.
But
oh, sorry. Oh, I forgot. Sorry, you tell. Apologies. So we'll just also clarify, because Maruf's question about the investment at the advertising. I kind of wondered whether we just need to clarify, because I think Councillor was under the impression that we'd missed income. Actually, it's a valuation issue, isn't it? So if you could just clarify that as well, just so that the committee are clear what the issue was as well. Thank you. Yeah.
hey, Dave, and then Angela.
Okay, thank you. Yes, a number of things there. As the auditors have said, on the budget side, adult social care and children's social care is a large part of our worries. That's common with other councils, but we probably have frankly a larger scale of problem and across both areas. So that needs a lot of work to make sure we keep those figures under control. We're also, as members are aware, looking closely at our leisure costs. Again, during COVID, social care costs have tended to increase and leisure income has tended to reduce, whereas leisure expenditure is relatively fixed. So that's another area we need to look at for 21-2 and going forward. Remembering that this report now is looking back to 2021, so we've got 21-2 and 22-3 to look at. So that's that area. Yes, on members' interest, Dan is absolutely right. We've had discussions with the auditors already about how we can do a bit more checking on that. We asked for declarations of interest from all 84 members, and there were a couple of declarations missing. So we need perhaps to prod members, and I'm hoping that's what Simon's going to recommend to make sure that we get everything in there, and that we do all the checking that we need. And I can confirm, yes, on the valuations one, it's that the value needed to take account of the fact there's an income stream from that, and as the council will know, an income stream from an asset potentially increases its value because more income from an asset means it's worth more. In simple terms, people would pay more to take an asset from you if it's got an income stream than if it doesn't have an income stream. So we need to reflect that in evaluation, but it is a balance sheet movement. It's not that the income was missed. So the council is not missing anything. It's that the auditors quite rightly are trying to make sure that our balance sheet is absolutely correct. So that's what they're doing.
While Simon is writing a very important resolution there, can I ask Angela, and then Ben, did you want to come in? You're looking alert. Okay, sorry, Angela, do you mind waiting a second while we have a bit of clarification?
Yeah, sorry, Dave just said that 2 declarations were missed. Do we mean that actually 2 councillors have not submitted a declaration of interest at all? Or that they were out of date or an issue on them?
These items were not included on the declarations and should have been.
So they have submitted, there's just items not included, okay.
Thank you. Right, Angela.
My questions are in terms of, thank you very much to the auditors for all the work, and my questions are not actually to the auditors, but they are to us as a council on how we're moving forward, following some of the recommendations from the auditors. So at the beginning of the report, there is the issue of the errors and how that is being addressed for you know, the audit that we're just about to start. So it's on page 22, and the formula errors, and how ready are we for, you know, it's imminent, the start of the audit for the current financial year. And then on page 43, with regards to how prepared we are for the reporting, the IFRS 16, and where we are at, and if there are any time scales and any plans to just take that on board and report in the way that the auditors are, you know, suggesting that we should report on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Dave?
Thank you, Councillor. You're quite right. One of the most important things when you get an audit report is to act on the findings and make improvements for next year. And although, you know, because of COVID and difficulties in audit workload, we're quite late getting this year's opinion. We're already working with the auditors to make improvements where necessary. There have been several meetings already this week discussing on how we do things for next year and how we improve things. So on the formula error, that's one that's crept in the last couple of years in different areas. Previous year was an error on one of our spreadsheets. This year was an error on one of our property services spreadsheets in the detail of the formulae. In both cases, we picked those errors up ourselves within 3 or 4 days of the accounts being submitted, because we do QA. It's literally that because we're trying to hit a timetable, and particularly with COVID, it was very tight, that QA was just slightly later than we would have liked. And so we're going to try and build in a little bit more time this year, subject to still the issues of working from home and things, making things tight. So we've got time to do that final QA before they get in. More generally, we have a process of going through all audit recommendations. There's a series of detailed ones and detailed improvements on how we can do things, and talking to the auditors, and they've been very receptive about how they can do things differently as well, that we all work through. The summary ones are here, and what we will be doing on the audit committee, and I believe it is June, there's a formal report back to the committee on the formal recommendations and what we do in response. That's one we normally do every year. I think last year it may not have been because of COVID, but normally we do that every year. We try and do it around about 6 months after the audit finishes, and that's quite often 6 months before the next audit, but again, timetables moved a bit. That will formally respond to all the recommendations, and we'll tell the committee and give some assurance that we're acting on them, because we're always very keen to make the improvements that the auditors point out every year.
Right, Simon, have you got some words of wisdom for us?
I don't know about that, but thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I mean, I'd say it's a bit obviously. You know, we need to make sure that the people's records are correct. And you know, I thank the auditors for essentially bringing this to our attention. And it is, I think, for me, the concern is that, as you say, it was so easy to find a gap. In terms of just pick one and they're there. So my recommendation really is just around certainly immediately to kind of get in touch with the whips to say you know, please ensure all your members are have everything up to date, and it is importantly correct. In terms of obviously we're coming to an election and there will be new members and training opportunities, so just to make sure that we include this in that and the importance of it in that. And then just obviously the next time we're looking at the issues around this and the standards regime, to perhaps have a bit of a dig into it further, perhaps when we say in private and can discuss it in detail, perhaps. Thank you.
Did you catch that, Jay?
I did, yeah.
Great. I think that perhaps we need to send out regular reminders to members to say filling in your declaration of interest is not an annual event. It's an as and when. And perhaps that's something that we can ask group whips to do, but also who's in charge of the... Is it... Sorry.
The monitoring officer maintains the record, so it would be for the monitoring officer.
So perhaps we could ask the monitoring officer to send out a reminder. I mean, we get a reminder at the beginning of each municipal year when you have the newly elected people, and perhaps we could do one, I don't know, in the autumn as well, because people's circumstances change and they just don't think to change their declarations of interest. If people are willfully not putting things in, I think that's a very different matter, which should be a subject of, that would be a criminal offence, would it?
It is a criminal offence not to declare. If it's a DPI, I don't know whether these were DPIs, but if it's a DPI, it's a criminal offence not to declare them.
Well, so perhaps I think we ought to remind members of that, because it's not just another bit of bureaucracy that gets sent round to you, it's actually a legal requirement, isn't it? So can you add that to Simon's bit and make sense of the pair of us? Sorry, Angela.
Can I add something else to it? It's the initial one. I think we do get reminders from the monitoring officer. I certainly remember one, within the last year. I think maybe the first one that we fill as new members, maybe have some examples of what we need to put in. Because I remember going to the monitoring officer and say, do I need to put that I have an allotment in there, kind of thing? Because some of the headings are vague. So maybe have some examples for new members, and then remind people would be good.
That sounds sensible. We can have a blitz of allotment holders on the council.
I mean, just to say, it's a good point, and I think the other advice is, if in doubt, ask. It's best to ask, isn't it?
I think my instinct is always, if in doubt, declare, because it's better to over-declare than under-declare. So anyway, with all of those different things, can we agree that we've received this report and we will look forward to the report in June or July, which actually formally gives our response? So thank you both for coming and testing out our new equipment, and I think you're going to have your tea now.
Thanks very much, Chair. That's great.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you all.
Right, see you both.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Agenda item 7, compliance with international auditing standards. This is Linda or you? It's you.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. I'll take this one. This is a report that comes to the committee annually that summarises the pretty weighty responsibilities that the committee has and the information it receives each year to enable it to discharge those responsibilities. It's intended to include in one document a summary of all that information so the committee can demonstrate its responsibilities and how it discharges them. It concludes that you have had sufficient information to discharge them, so it's purely for noting and for information for members. It's useful, I think, for the committee. Sorry, I'm rather off put by the picture that appeared on the screen. I don't know what's going on there. But also the external auditors ask these sorts of questions, so it's useful for them as well. I'm happy to take any questions on it, but otherwise the report is purely for noting.
Thank you very much. I had one item I just wanted to either add to it or add as a reminder of some sort on page 53, where it said about the confidence that it had adequate assurance over the accuracy of the annual accounts and gave examples of the training and everything we'd had. And the only thing that's missing, and we need to make sure happens next year, is that between Jay and I, we managed to forget that we had agreed to have a private meeting with the auditors, the external auditors and members of the committee without officers. So can we just note that? And Jay and I are very sorry. And make sure that next year, whoever you have as a much better chair will remember to do that for you. Are there any other comments from anybody? Angela?
No? I think what you're looking at. No, I think it's really good to have it all summarised like that, and I think we've commented before on how useful actually it gives just an idea of how much work actually goes, is done by the officers and how much responsibility we have in this committee, which is a bit scary.
That's true. It is a bit scary, isn't it? But we're a tough bunch, aren't we? We're the audit committee. So with that, can we agree the recommendations, confirm that it gives an accurate reflection of reports we've received, and to confirm that we do now have an overview of council systems of internal control and are assured that we are fulfilling the requirements of those of us who are charged with governance under the international auditing standards? Thank you, everybody. So we'll move on to item 8, which is a report on SEND statutory services and compliance. And we have Andrew Jones and Rosemary Ward, sorry, I need new glasses, who are going to speak to their report. So thank you. Oh, sorry, Josie.
It's and sorry, thank you, Chair. And maybe I should have asked before the meeting, but it's just the number of acronyms in the report. I think if you're going to do a report with this many, and bearing in mind these are all public reports that are going on the website for people to understand, it's very difficult to follow it unless you've got a background and you know what all the initials actually stand for. So, and I think it's very unfair to sort of throw it at you at the start of a meeting or the start of your part of the report. But if there are going to be this many, maybe a glossary of terms might be good in future. So if you could pick a few of them up as you go along for those of us that aren't immersed in this area, that would be good. Thank you.
Yes, for the lay people here, like thee and me, Josie. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. So I'm Andrew Jones and I'm the Director of Education and Skills, and Rose Ward is the interim head of SEN in the council. Point taken in terms of the acronyms, and we can have a test of Rose's memory of those acronyms as we go through, but we'll certainly try to explain that, and we'll circulate to the committee afterwards as well, if that's okay, Chair, a glossary immediately afterwards as soon as we can as part of that. Just wanted to introduce the report with just some context around it again, just to ensure that the committee is tuned into this. The council plays a very important role in relation to SEND services, and in particular in coordinating the assessment of young people and ensuring appropriate provision. However, in this sphere we are a partner with other organisations as well, including the CCG and the Children's Hospital. And because of the way in which we work jointly, SEND services in local authorities, including Sheffield, are regarded as an area. So part of the process of actually assessing the effectiveness of the area is to be inspected on a reasonably frequent basis. And we were last inspected in 2018. And at that point, the inspectors found that there were 7 areas of significant weakness within the area, and those were the responsibility jointly and then also individually with those partners that I have mentioned. And as a consequence of that, all the partners in the area were then responsible for creating a written statement of action that would actually address the areas of weakness and to ensure progress. As a bit of context, roughly about half of all local authorities in England either have or have had a written statement of action following their inspections in their particular areas. So since 2018, there's been a lot of activity taken, and Rose is going to describe some of the impact of that. I think it's fair to say that action doesn't always necessarily lead to impact, and actually possibly in the early stages of our response to the 2018 report, there was a greater focus on doing things rather than necessarily tracking the impact of that for the quality of services, and also in particular for the outcomes for young people as well. But Rose and I are absolutely determined in our roles to make sure that we continue to focus on improvements in the SEND service. So following the 2018 inspection, the area should have then been re-inspected 2 years later in 2020, but the pandemic delayed that. We weren't inspected last year when we thought that we might, so actually we'd just been recently revisited in February. Unfortunately, I had a pre-meeting with the chair the other day, and we were hoping that the report might be published today so we could actually refer to it, but it's not yet published. So it remains confidential until the point at which it is actually published. So we can't talk directly about the inspection outcomes, but what we can weave into our report today is our self-evaluation that we went into the inspection, and we believe that our self-evaluation is accurate. So our self-evaluation said that overall, across all the areas, we made sufficient progress. Sufficient progress is a term that's used by Ofsted, but I have to say, even having made sufficient progress, we know that there's still a lot to do. So in Rose's report that we're going to go through shortly, we will not only talk about where we've got to, but also some of the things that we need to do next as well as part of that. Of the 7 areas of weakness specifically, we think we made sufficient progress in terms of improving things in 6 out of the 7 areas, but in the 7th area, which is multi-agency transitions, and that means things like when children transition from birth or early years into a nursery setting, and then into primary school, and then into secondary, and then into adulthood and beyond. We think that that is still an area of weakness for us in the area, and it's the area that we're going to focus on most greatly going forward as well as part of that. Even where we have made progress, we know there's still things to do, so again we will be making plans to continue with those improvements as well as part of that. On our last visit to the committee reminded us that that in terms of its audit purpose, and that in particular wanted to look at detail of statistics around that as well. So we prepared a report that certainly does that, and obviously we'll go through that now and then, take any questions as we go. So thank you, Rose.
We let Rose, and then you can get in there before Maruf.
Okay, thank you. I'll just take you through some of the report. I won't read it verbatim, but I will pick up on the abbreviations and acronyms as I go through. So just for a bit of context at the beginning of the report, I thought it was important to note how many children in our city have education, health and care plans. So that's 4,041 children in total. That was obviously accurate as the day that I wrote this report. It's likely to be more now. If I got the child population of our city right, that would constitute 5%. There are a third of our young people who are in post-16 that have education, health and care plans, which is a really high proportion. And as
can I just leap in? I think something that we asked at the pre-meeting was if you could remind us of what all the localities mean as well. E, F, G, they're all the bits of the city, but we're not all necessarily, I don't know where E is, or I don't know where. Did either of you bring that with you so that we can have a wild idea of where everything is?
Yeah, I can explain that, yeah, if that's okay. So, like I said, the west of the city, so localities E, F and G. I'm not quite sure of the wards or names, but so E would be towards like Meadowhead. I don't know what that constitutes in terms of, and then F is around, so Abbeydale, Dore, Totley, and G would be out towards Stocksbridge. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, so that is the area of the city, or the areas of the city that have the highest number of children. That's not inclusive of the post-16, so that's the pre-16 education, health and care plans. And locality F, which is now going to test me, because I do believe that's the Dore and Totley end of the west of the city, they have the highest overall population of children with education, health and care plans. I won't take you through the next, well, I can take you through the next section, but Andrew's already talked about the written statement of action that came out of the joint Ofsted and CQC area inspection that was conducted in November 2018. I have listed the 7 areas there, and as Andrew has pointed out, numbers 1 to 6, our self-evaluation was that we'd made sufficient progress, and the area of 7, which was our multi-agency transitions, we determined that we'd not made sufficient progress. What I will just say, and obviously Andrew's already hit on this, is that's not us saying they are good, that is us saying there has been sufficient progress since they were identified as a significant area of weakness. So we've still got the journey to go in order to then prove that we are good against these areas as the new framework around SEN is produced from given out from Ofsted. I just pointed out some of the statistics in terms of going back into 2021 and the summer of where our compliance in terms of the 20 weeks process. So we know we've got 20 weeks in order to determine, first of all, if we're going to complete a statutory assessment, then if we're going to produce an education, health and care plan, and then to issue the plan within that 20-week timescale. That compliance dipped from, it was 32%, it went down to 18%. And the treble figures of plans that were exceeding that 20-week process. That's as I came into post, so we put in place quite a quick improvement plan in regards to that, in terms of we engaged with the plan writers in order to write some plans. We started on an immediate rolling programme in terms of recruiting into what we would call inclusion officers. They're the people who write the plans. So we did a lot of recruitment in that regard. You can see from the graph that's been provided that there has been a significant improvement in terms of our compliance, and we've risen, it was actually 96.5% as of the end of February. What I will just say in this area is what's really important is obviously to produce the plans in 20 weeks is one thing, and to get good compliance, but it's also really important that they're of good quality as well. So what we introduced in order to ensure that our pace didn't jeopardise the quality of the plans is we also put a quality assurance audit in before any plan goes to parents. That's been a recent introduction to make sure that we are still producing or are producing quality plans. Annual reviews is an area that still needs improvement, and you'll probably be aware that there's been a recent High Court ruling in terms of really holding local authorities to account in terms of the turnaround and the timescales within annual reviews that's not actually been adequately defined within the Code of Practice, and now the High Court ruling is bringing in that actually you've got 12 weeks in its entirety to have the final amended plan, but you have to have the amendment notice, so that's the amended plan to the family within 4 weeks of the annual review meeting taking place. That obviously then puts pressure onto our schools or our providers and our colleges in order to ensure that they provide the paperwork into the local authority in good time to allow us to get that turnaround of those amendment notices. I've talked through some of the staffing in terms of we've now done a rolling recruitment. We've increased from 16 to 22 officers within the team, and we've also got new locality managers, so we're able to cover more of the city. We also had to consider the EP is Educational Psychology Service, because they are really statutorily crucial to the education, health and care needs assessment process. So we engaged with local and agencies to enable us to be able to still produce that timely advice that goes into the education, health and care needs assessment. We also recruited to the service manager vacancy, so we now have, and I will touch wood at this point, a full team of people, but that usually then leads to somebody leaving the service. We also had a recruitment around, I manage the autism team within the SEND broader services, and we have a new team leader there who's looking at how we deliver the support across children with social communication interaction difficulties. We've got a new head of the hearing impaired and vision impaired services and a new principal educational psychologist in post. Alongside then the new post-16 manager, I call her new, she's been in post for about a year now actually. So we've got post-16 manager, and she's obviously been crucial to planning some of what needs to happen around particularly that post-16 journey for our young people and those PFA pathways. The audit, what we've done within the audit is we've reviewed how we audit education, health and care plans. because if the way in which we audit is just to determine that the right words are in the right part of a plan, that's not a true audit of what was the experience of a parent, of a child, what difference has it made, is the school or college or setting able to deliver the provision that is listed within the plan. So what we're doing is we've reviewed how we do this, and part of this is about the quality of the plan that's outputted, but it's also about that experience. So we're going to have a triangulation approach, and we're going to trial a buddying approach to this, where because it's been done in isolation as well, where two people go forward and audit and get in touch with the school and the family, and then a group approach as well, which is a much more dynamic approach. But the other thing is that's got to drive service improvement. And actually currently it's not, we haven't got that full cycle of it. It feeds back in and it drives the service improvement. So that's something I'm very keen on looking at. In terms of the funding, and again, obviously the funding helps the schools, settings, colleges to deliver what is outlined in the education, health and care plans. So we're looking at actually how do we arrange funding for those children and young people in order to enable our providers to be able to provide the support for children and young people. We know that we've struggled with our sufficiency in terms of specialist places for children. And there's ongoing work happening with our commissioners who have commissioned a lot of specialist provision over this last year, but it's still, and particularly through the phase transfer process as we've gone through this phase transfer, so from 6 to 7 particularly, we have noted that there's been a shortfall in places, but we are continuing to work on that. And we do have the Discovery School opening from September this year, which is great. And then just in terms of an overview of performance, to ensure, because it's all right to reach the compliance and have the plans for the audit, but then how do we make sure that we don't dip again? Because that's the important thing. Now we've risen, we need to keep that at the high that we've hit. So we have fortnightly in-service compliance meetings, which we call them compliance meetings, performance clinics. They alternate every fortnight to make sure actually things aren't going over timescale. And if a plan is likely to go over timescale and it's in the best interest of the child to go over timescale, then obviously we try and pull it as far back towards the 20 weeks as we possibly can. But then we try and remove any barriers that might be in that space. We do have risk meetings to highlight where there are causes of concern, and then again we can action plan, break down barriers, and bring in other colleagues from other areas into that as well. So if it's a care-led need or a health-led need, we can bring our partners into that. We have, on occasion, through Andrew's leadership, been able to direct some of our schools in terms of if there's going to be a placement breakdown or if we need to place a child where schools aren't accepting of our position that they need to accept a child. And we make sure that's done in a supported way. We've introduced the practice standards into the service to really to allow staff to understand what their role is, but also what their manager's role is in the whole expectations, and that's also supported by a supervision policy that's every 4 weeks they meet with their manager. Like I've talked about the audit tools already. We did have at this point, as I wrote this report, we had a steering group for the written statement of action. The steering group that was for the written statement of action is now looking at how we pick up the areas of ongoing weakness in terms of the multi-agency transitions and moving that forward. So we haven't disbanded the group, we've just refocused the work that we're doing there. We work with the Inclusion Board to unblock any barriers, so there are governance structure in terms of holding us to account for the progress that we're making. And then we're looking at the local offer, and we've just had agreement to recruit to a local offer officer, which I think is an exceptionally hard job title to say, to help develop our local offer, to get our communication much better and information more readily available to young people and to families. And we've also got the reporting both into our senior leadership team and to the Director's Performance Clinic, again holding us to account for both the timeliness, the compliance and the quality of the work that we're doing.
Thank you very much. That was a tour de force. Thank you. I have 3 people who want to ask questions. I have Angela, then Maroof, and then Josie. So, I have 4 people, and then Ben.
Hi, thank you very much for the report, and yeah, you can breathe now. I agree with Councillor Paczek that it's really important whoever presents reports, they don't assume that people know what all this means. We had, I used to be on the health, adult and social care scrutiny, and we agreed that we wouldn't have any reports where things weren't spelt out in full first, and then, but also I think the locality issue is important, because with us not being able to know exactly which ward these localities, we're not able to ask you certain questions, because, for example, if locality F is really totally indoor, which is a very affluent area, I would ask you, is that because the parents there are better at getting their children assessed? But if that was in an area of deprivation, I would ask you, is that because that is aggravated by the fact that it's already an area of deprivation? So you see how important for us is to understand where these areas are, because we would ask you completely different questions. So I think we need to really understand, have like a vision of where our students and children that have needs are geographically, because if they are mostly in affluent areas, and it looks like certain areas it means that we're not doing a very good job in the deprived areas, and vice versa. So, because it is very important. So I would like to see a map, and also map it with the deprivation indexes and things like that. I'm sure it's available. I couldn't find it on the website though. Have a lovely website. That is my only point, really. I would like to ask you those questions, but if we're not sure what they are, I can't ask you the questions.
Am I all right? Just to so just in terms of the point that you've made, so what I will say is, in locality F, which is more towards Untitled, that is definitely one of the more affluent areas of the city. And you are right that we do see a higher proportion of education, health and care plans in the more affluent areas of the city than we do in the more deprived areas. So that is a statistic that is known to be true across the city. So I take the point, and obviously it's a learning point for next time I produce a report, and I will make sure that that's very apparent, as because I know we all talk about different areas, different letters and different meanings. So, but yes, that is definitely part of the statistics.
So there we really have an equalities issue there, because we are just, again, like in lots of other areas in the city, people who are more affluent get more than people who are less affluent. So how do we score in terms of equalities, in terms of special educational needs?
So what I would say on that point is, it could be that we look and said, if you've got an education, health and care plan, you may get more support for your needs. However, what we also know is that schools do support children, and there are a lot of initiatives and pilots that tend to go into more of the, I would say localities A and B, but I mean like the Firth Park, Burngreave, I'm trying to think where they are now. So what could be determined more deprived areas of the city, because people know there is, one will be distracting there, there is more deprivation in that area, so you're likely to put more resource within the area. So it doesn't necessarily translate that because you haven't got an education, health and care plan, you don't have the support. It's just you haven't got it statutorily within a plan.
Yeah, well, I used to work in schools. I was a teacher for 16 years, so not necessarily, because you plan lessons differently as a teacher if you know that a student has a particular need and they are in mainstream, and you can't do that if you haven't got that information. You may notice it as a practitioner, but that's, you may get a support assistant if you've got a certain number of students in your class that need support, but you don't get it if you haven't got that. So it's not actually that simple.
I take your point, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Maroof.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to agree with what Councillor Genzio said regarding mapping. I think that's terribly important to to assess where these issues are. Before I go into my observations, this is one of the areas that I've been closely involved with, and Andrew and I have been working very closely together in terms of raising awareness around this area. And I think it wouldn't be wrong of me to say that this is a hugely challenging area, and we have struggled and we continue to struggle in this area. I mean, one thing we did do, a chair transition 4 where this has been debated at length, so I'm not going to repeat all that because it's already on record. But clearly there is a absolutely massive issue here, because a lot of members' casework is around this work area, definitely. I know we're putting across a message here that we can only dig down into the audit issues around here, but generally speaking, I think it wouldn't be wrong of me to say again that this is an area that you guys yourself would, I'm not putting words in your mouth here, but would admit that the challenges are very high. And the reason that they are very critical as well is from the stories that you hear from parents in particular who are going through the hurdles, and in some cases they are better equipped to go through them, and like Councillor Agenzio said, they are much more educated to go through certain barriers, whereas other areas they're not. And I've had both experiences of both areas where the difficulties have arisen, and they keep continuing to arise as people become more and more aware that there are issues in learning around SEND. I mean, one thing I would clearly say is that it's good to have these reports, but it's good to be brutally honest about it as well, because there's nothing as we as members can do if there's a veneer around this that we're all right and the veneer cracks, and then we end up with a situation where we have quite a number of problems. And one of the key areas that I think, and you'll be able to answer this far better than I can, you've already alluded to the fact that there is issues around SEND, autism, etc., wherever there's learning issues across the country. And there are acute shortages of staff to fill those roles. I mean, the direct question would be, how are we going to be any different from those areas in terms of recruiting and retaining staff? I know we've talked about it before, but I think it's important as an audit committee that we are aware what are the actions behind that. And secondly, we always seem to skirt around the subject of how close we are sometimes to intervention. I know we've moved away from that more recently because we've put a new team in place, and the new team needs to be given time to actually bed in and change things. But I still feel, having talked about this subject for the last 2 or 3 years now, probably longer, 4 years now, that we've been talking about it, I still feel that we're not there. We're quite a way away, and it's nothing to do with the staff. It's nothing to do with the way you're operating. There just seems to have been such a big gap from where we started to where we are now in terms of catching up. And just the numbers that you're talking about, 4,041, etc., it's still a fairly high number, and that number is obviously going to keep increasing. And the other issue that sometimes parents actually raise with us is once you do get to the stage where you get an educational healthcare plan, EHCP, it's actioning that plan and the quality of that plan and how the quality of the education follows on from that, which is more important, I think, or as important as getting to recognise that the child actually needed an EHCP. So I think there are a lot of things that we still need to do, and I would say to the chair that we bring this back in the new municipal year fairly early on again, because I think that what will follow, and this isn't anticipating what we might agree tomorrow in T4, there are going to be certain recommendations around SEND, and you're aware of my concerns around this as well. So for me, there are still a huge number of issues. There are still a huge number of parents in this city who are still aggrieved with the service and will continue to be, because their child is the most important child to them. We might consider it as numbers, but as a family, they are going through this. And I've had teachers, one particular case where the parent is a teacher, and she was actually struggling to work around her way around the system. And I have actually talked to teachers. My own daughter is a teacher as well. It is difficult for them. And Angela's absolutely right. You have to prepare different lesson plans for different types of pupils when you've got them in one classroom. And it's not easy to do that. So I think what I would suggest, and this is something that you could answer, is a little bit more engagement with schools directly. It might be from the team themselves, rather than being a team in the centre. We need to get out to the schools and work with them. Sorry, Chair, this is a very key area for me, so that's why I'm carrying on a little bit, if you would indulge me. And get the schools to understand what you are actually offering, because that is a criticism that I'm seeing every time. Is yes, SEND exists; it exists in the centre, but sometimes we don't get the actual benefit of what they can deliver. So a bit of education on that front might be quite helpful, and that with the governors as well. And the other area that is critical, I think, and I'm sure you're picking up on it. I know Andrew is aware of this as well. Is when pupils are being offered areas, schools where they have got no connections with whatsoever. Otherwise, they're excluded from being educated. And there are examples of that in the city, which euphemistically is called homeschooling sometimes. It isn't necessarily homeschooling, it's just that they have no other alternative but to school children at home. And that in areas where there is difficulties for parents to be able to access basic educational equipment, is very, very difficult. And I have had one instance of a parent in the north where the child was out of school for quite a number of months, if not years, because they couldn't send the child to the school that was allocated to them. So by default, they end up in that position. But I will finish by saying that there is a great deal of effort that is actually being put in by the team now. I've sensed that. But we as politicians need to also recognise the fact that we have to give them the tools to work with, and that is finance. We've got to be different. I mean, we can't keep saying we are better. We're about on par with, say, I don't know, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, etc. That doesn't necessarily make it any easier for a family whose child is not getting the education. And in particular, we've already talked about this previously, where during the pandemic, there have been cohorts of pupils who are now come out of the system, having missed out on 2 years of very important education. And what I will finish on is the experience that we had with discussing with the post-16 children that we invited in to the authority. And some of their message were far, far stronger than any academic could put them to me, to be fair. And I think you guys benefited from that as well quite considerably. They were just, what they were saying, Chair, for your benefit was that, you were there, yes, you were there, yes, you were there. So it was quite powerful, I think, that their decisions are being taken by other people when their decisions should be taken by them, included within that decision-making process. I know I've said quite a lot, but what I'm trying to get to here is a little bit of open honesty in terms of it wouldn't be judged as inadequacy in terms of officers, but where we are as an authority. And I'll stop at that. Thank you, Chair, for indulging me.
Oh, you can tell it's my last meeting, can't you? I'm being nice. Were you expecting any answers to that, or was that a general sort of...
No. I was expecting answers on the staffing issues and getting closer to schools, and also whether we're anywhere near intervention.
I'll pick up some of those points. So first of all, I think for the committee as a whole, in relation to a better and richer geographical analysis for you, that's heard, and we will prepare that. And Councillor Argenti is right that actually it's really not simple, this. But ironically, if we just give you a map of where the HCPs are, that won't tell you anything either. So I think we need, and we do have this information in terms of where the children with the HCPs are, where other children who are on the SEND register are, who haven't got EHCPs. In particular then to compare that to the sufficiency, because actually if you've got all the kids with special needs in one part of the city, but actually the facilities for them are somewhere else, I think that would be useful for the committee to see and to have. and also more broader resources and finance as well around it. So we can certainly prepare that both in a visual map form and also in other forms as well. And whenever we are invited back to committee, which I do hope is, I'm very keen actually that in order to keep the momentum going, that actually we continue properly to be held to account for this, because I think that's one of the ways in which we can continue with the momentum around it. When we were inspected, the inspectors asked us to be honest, and I chuckled because I said, well, you're going to get honesty here by the bucket load, which we were. And I think one of the things that came out of our inspection is that one of the things that might come out of our inspection is that we know ourselves very well now, and that we have an accurate assessment of where we are as part of that, and that will feed into then our ability to give you very clear and direct answers to where we are up to. Councillor Maroof, you asked about intervention, and again, that I'd have to comment on the outcome of the inspection, but what I can say is that I think our assessment is accurate. I think we've made sufficient progress in 6 out of the 7 areas. I think it's unlikely that we would have any form of intervention on the one remaining area. If the Ofsted report concurs with our view, then we will still be held to account by the DFE, and we will have to produce a rapid improvement plan on that 7th area where we say we continue to be weak around that. But I think intervention itself is now highly unlikely, and I do think that we've got the right staffing and the right attitude, and we're starting to see the right culture pervading in the service to actually support that and to move things forward. I think that in relation to our work with schools, I'll ask Rose just to comment on that shortly, but again, it was part of the inspection, and I'm clear that actually we've done an awful lot to actually to strengthen the links between the central team and schools as part of that, and for them also to feel the benefit of that transparency as well. And you're absolutely correct, Councillor Maroof, we were at the scrutiny committee a couple of weeks ago, that in relation to everybody feeling the benefit of these improvements, they are sufficient progress. But as I will say, sufficient progress is hardly a gold medal. It's not there yet. As Rose has said, things are still not good. And that means that, first of all, there will be parents who still, who will not necessarily always feel the benefit of the improvements that have been made. And we still have some historic cases of cases that are going through that we're still dealing with as well. But Rose and I are both committed to engage with parents and their families as part of that, to hear where problems still exist, and we ask them to bring those forward to us as part of that. In the Council's one-year plan, we have part of that something called reducing exclusion in all its forms, and it's very much what you were saying to us, Councillor Maroof, in terms of the exclusion can take different forms. So, for example, an exclusion of a child, how is that different, for example, to a child being on a very part-time timetable? If their children aren't actually attending school on a very part-time timetable, they still are excluded. If they are not accessing their education for other reasons or through other choices, then again, it's a form of exclusion. So we have that in the one-year plan. We're starting to make some inroads into that. And as the Council develops its longer-term strategic plan, we would hope to be represented as part of that as well. We are cognisant of the effect of the pandemic, and we continue to work out and determine the support that's needed through that, particularly in relation to children with social or emotional difficulties as well. And finally, the children from age 16 and above who came to the Transitional Committee and then visited the Town Hall with the Chair the other week did give us incredibly powerful feedback about their experiences. And in particular, the whole point of an EHCP and the whole point of the process that goes around it is to enable support to be provided in a timely way. And actually that whole process sometimes actually gets bogged down in either the bureaucracy or other things that are around it. And the testimony of the young people was very clear in terms of confusion around different elements of the process, and if they themselves, because obviously in the HCP can last until a young person is 25, if they are to take on some accountability and responsibility in terms of negotiating that with us, that they need to understand that process better. Rose, would you want to pick up about the work we're doing with schools?
Okay, yeah, so just in terms of the work with schools, what we do have is, and Ofsted did comment on this, and I'm not giving away a secret because our Senko's talked to them about this, was that we do have quite an extensive training offer which covers about what a graduated approach should look like, the education, health and care needs assessment process, the annual review, preparation for adulthood. So we do have an extensive training offer. However, what I will note on that is that the input from today to say, I don't think it goes far enough yet. And in terms of that training, it needs to extend into our autism practitioners, into our educational psychology model, in order to be able to reach the teachers in the classrooms that are the front line of teaching children and young people every day. So I accept that we've not gone to that extent yet, but the Senkos in the schools obviously are there to support the teachers as well. But I think there needs to be more in-reach, as you've pointed out, to say, you know, actually we are here, we are listening, and these are ideas and strategies that can be used. Just leading on into that, what we have done is we've done quite a lot of communication and consultation with our schools in terms of what would the team around the school look like. And just in fact this morning we've had some of our head teachers into our senior leadership team within education and skills to talk about actually what would make the biggest difference in schools in order to be able to support young people and children. And they're very clear that the support around the needs of autism, of SEO, social, emotional, and mental health. I sometimes forget to use my proper full words, apologies, so we'd say SEMH, so social, emotional and mental health difficulties, and also speech and language. So just on that, we have already, I talked about earlier within the report, we've appointed a new leader for the autism team who's really keen to change some of the practices there in terms of offering the advice, guidance, support through training that for the broader, to get that broader impact. But then also, when we do work with a teacher in order to say these strategies may help within the classroom, you don't leave with 25 different things to do or to try, because sometimes that can be, so what am I doing and where am I going first? It's about picking out the priorities that need to be worked upon. And the head teachers that came in this morning said they do find it quite overwhelming. The teachers' feedback is quite overwhelming when you've got lots of people coming in advising on what strategies to put in place. So to have like the critical 2 or 3 strategies could be really helpful. So the autism team leader is working on that kind of model with her team. And then on the educational psychology mode of working, that team has just been what we've determined is fairly distributed across the city, and by fair I don't mean it's evened out in terms of levels of need. What I mean is it's just been, you get EPs that are just spread across the city in the same number, no matter what the level of need is. So the new principal EP is very keen to work out what proportion of educational psychology should be in different areas of the city according to the levels of need, and not just the number of education, health and care plans, but the need within the schools. And she's also keen to develop a traded model which will allow our schools to buy in more time as and when that is needed. And again, our schools have been consulted with that, and they're quite keen on taking that model forward. Just on the other point that our head teachers and teachers are making to us in terms of the speech and language input, I know our colleagues, both in commissioning within the local authority and within the CCG, are taking forward a speech and language review. There has been a significant increase in the funding that goes into our speech and language therapy that has been somewhat absorbed into the statutory assessment process in order to ensure that the provision is right for children with education, health and care plans. So we still need to look again what is needed for more broadly across the city in terms of the provision around speech and language, because again, schools are feeding back to us that is absolutely crucial and critical at this time. And all of that should create, as we move forward with the model that we hope will will gain some momentum, and our schools are very keen on working with us on, is that team around the school, but also the team around the locality. So you've got education, health and care practitioners who sit either in and around your school or in and around your locality. So you get that consistency and feedback of a person, so you've got a relationship because that works better, but also the expertise that you need to be able to draw upon. And I know it's not just the local authority, it is our CCG colleagues who are also coming into that, and our colleagues within children and families.
Thank you. I don't know how you feel with Andrew volunteering for you all to come back again, because this has been a big item which has been very useful. And it's Josie next.
Thank you. Well, first of all, it's about 2 to 3 years since I was on the Children and Young People Scrutiny, and I'd just like to say one of the biggest problems we had back then, before you started on this journey, was the fact that what you were telling us at scrutiny differed totally to what parents and other people were telling us. And I do think there's more synchronisation now between what you're saying is happening and I think what people are seeing out there. And so I think it is good to recognise the improvements that you've made, and a lot of what I wanted to ask and raise has been raised by Councillor Argentio and Mohamed Maroof. Sorry if I got that the wrong way round. And but it's just, and it was probably a throwaway comment, and it's probably not reflective of where you are. But A and B areas might get a lot of money for other issues, but that's because there are other issues. And children might not get the attention before they get to school, and as we all know, that the early years are the most important years, and if they're not getting attention in the early years, they need to certainly get it as soon as they get into a school setting or a nursery setting. So the fact that's the reason why there is the additional finance in those areas, and quite rightly so, because at the end of the day, you want those children to have advanced as absolutely much as possible by the time they leave school. And, you know, if that means levelling up what they're not necessarily getting at home, then that needs to be the case. So it does worry me that you sort of said, but those schools are getting a lot of money anyway, but they're getting it for other reasons, and the demands, they just, what's the word, community demands and demands on the parents, and you know, the parents could be working 2 or 3 jobs and still struggling to break even. There's all sorts of issues down there. So it could be, and it does worry me that there could be special educational needs children in there that are not getting picked up, because then in amongst all the other children in the classroom, you're going to get more disruption. It's going to make it harder for them to learn. It's going to make it harder for the other children who desperately need to catch up to learn, just because of the environmental circumstances. And that's the thing that's worrying me, because it does reassure me that you've mentioned that it's good and that you're doing it in a timely way. You've recognised that lost time in education and the value of that and the disruption is important, which gives me confidence. But it's just that business that there could be children, or there will be children, I think, in those areas where the parents aren't articulating the need, or maybe not even recognising that there is a need, because they don't perhaps get the time to spend with the children, or just don't recognise it themselves. Parents could have needs themselves, and that's another issue as well. You know, in the different, I don't want to go into marketing strategies and labelling people A, B, C's and D's and the rest of it, but if you've got professional parents that are more likely to notice a need in the children than, say, parents that struggle to read and write themselves, or parents whose it's a second language themselves, and they're the children need picking up for themselves to advance them as far as possible, but they also need picking up so that they don't disrupt other children that need that attention as well. So I suppose really what I'm asking is that we go away and look to make sure you've come a long way, you've dealt with a lot, but maybe the next step now is to look at the people that you're not getting to hear about, and that does worry me a bit. Thank you.
So just to come back on that point, I do just want to reassure people that when I talked about the provision in the north and what was going in and the additional support, it wasn't just about monetary support. So I just want to explain what I meant because I don't think I explained it very well. So when I talked about that team around the locality and the team around the school, we've trialled the input of that in the north of the city. So what we've done is we've brought together a group of professionals, which includes the community consultant paediatrician, the autism team, as I've talked about, the educational psychology service, colleagues from the 0 to 5 SEND service, so that covers, we've tried to bring the early years into this process, well, from inclusion attendance and from MAST, in order to be able to have those really holistic conversations about the needs of the children within the locality. So it's not about a monetary input, it's about those people who need to be able to support families, like you said, who might not be able to advocate for themselves. So it's taking that support into the locality. And what's been particularly positive coming out of it is the work by our health colleagues and the consultant paediatrician, who's now started running clinics in schools, because one of the issues that we face is the not bought to appointments. So in order to running the clinics in the schools means the parents can access the support, the children can access the support exactly where they are, so they don't need to go to the other side of the city. So that's what I meant about the input into the north of the city, as we know in areas a more deprived area.
Thank you.
And then just specifically, because SEND funding that we allocate comes from a budget called High Needs Block. Is the SEND funding itself is also targeted. It's not evenly distributed across the different localities. But because we haven't provided that, it's harder to demonstrate that today. But if we are invited back, we'll bring that to actually show where we actually do the targeting of that resource as well. But it's specific SEND funding that is targeted on some areas as well. So.
Ben.
Thank you, Chair. An observation and then 2 questions from me. So I was going to follow on the sort of equalities issue that Angela and Josie have mentioned. I don't think it needs repeating, but what I was going to suggest is that we raise those concerns to the committee. Until Maroof had spoken, I had no idea the committee was looking at it. I'm not on the committee, why would I? I'm on a different one. And I guess my observation and reflection and thought from that is, when we are considering an item that is being considered by a policy-driven committee, could we be cited of that? So we know what areas they're looking at, and then by omission, what areas they're not. So that our contributions aren't necessarily just directly to the officers that are here. We can say, actually, we've spotted something you guys haven't seen, or you're looking at something we don't think you need to, and it has more of an impact than just this forum. So I think if we could sort of note that as a request.
I think we're very lucky to have Maroof here, who chairs that committee that's been looking into all those issues. So, you know, we've got a live report in front of us.
Yeah. I guess the point is that there might be other issues in the future that we don't. And then my questions. So on the localities issue, I'm not sure if it's just a slight confusion about language, where we use letters instead of naming places, or if there's more of a geographical issue. So I'm not even clear where, sort of how the locality boundaries work. So would they be modelled on wards or LAC areas like other council services in many cases, and in other cases we have asked external partners to model their boundaries too, or are they based on different geographies to that? And if they're not based on wards or LAC areas, why not? That would be the question. And then the other was, so when you're talking about the EHC plans and the sort of rapid increase in compliance to the target, I mean, first of all, congratulations, that's an incredible turnaround in quite a short period of time. So I'd wonder whether that would be sustainable, given that the change has been so rapid. But also when you were talking about it, you talked about putting in an additional quality assurance process to make sure that the increase in pace didn't impact in quality. And I wondered whether that was something you envisaged being permanently there, or a temporary measure just to make sure that we could keep the quality up and then be satisfied that we were doing fine and then wouldn't need it.
In relation to the question about localities, which a very good question, and your second question, why not, is even more pithy one. The localities are, the school localities are based on, in essence, quite historic educational groupings of schools, which basically relate to how feeder schools feed into secondary schools. So at some point in the past, a long time ago, actually, the city was divided up into localities based upon a number of secondary schools, a number of feeder schools within them. So no, unfortunately, they don't necessarily map onto other LAC areas or onto other administrative ways of doing that. But they do tend to, because they're based on secondary schools and feeder schools, they do tend to focus on, and the resources tend to follow families as they move from their feeder schools into their secondary schools on the whole. I'll ask Rose just to pick up the compliance and QA question in particular, but within the detailed Rose's report, there's quite a sea change really in education skills, where we have introduced a greater emphasis on performance and a shift in performance culture. So at the city under me, there's a monthly director's performance clinic, and some of the data that you've been shared with you as a committee today, every month we interrogate that, and in particular looking for patterns and improvements, interrogating it in terms of where we need to make other improvements as part of that. And then under the director's performance clinic, there are then service performance clinics as well that Rose has alluded to. We introduced that about 18 months ago, and I think that's one of the ingredients that's starting to lead to some of the improvements that you've alluded to, Councillor Curran. But do you want to pick up on the QA process?
Absolutely. So no, the quality audit that we've introduced isn't something that we've done just to check ourselves at this moment in time. It's something that we will do all of the time, ongoing, I'd say forever, well, for as long as I'm in post anyway. And it's only actually, I've talked about this through the report as well, we're actually only going to expand our quality assurance processes, so we're never going to decrease or stop. It's about actually more than just the quality of what's written on the paper. It's about the experience of our children and families as a result of it as well.
I think we've absolutely thoroughly gone through your report here, and you still want to come back, and I'm sure everybody here would like you to come back. I would just echo, I think, what the others have said about the locality areas and them being meaningless to us, and even if you do carry on calling them A to Z, we would like to know the content of each letter so that we know which areas you're actually talking about. And I would also echo the concerns of Councillor Argencio and Councillor Paczek about the fact that it appears that the Dore and Tockley area has the most children's plans, if you like, and I echo what they say about concerns about sharp-elbowed parents. I don't doubt for 1 minute that those children who get those plans need and deserve and should have them. But it does seem very strange, certainly I think to myself and the other two, or I think everybody on the committee, to be truthful, that there is that gap between the west and the east of the city. I was a chair of governors in a school in the east of the city where we had to bring in 2-year-old provision because our 3-year-olds were coming in with no discernible speech patterns, and it was just catch up from the very beginning with them. And I contrast that with my own grandchildren who live on the west of the city, who just have a very different experience of schooling, and I'm so envious of it. I want that sort of level of schooling for all the children across this borough, as I'm sure we all do. So it would be useful to know why there is this discrepancy, how long it's been going, and also, is there a specific discrepancy? You know, SEN is, you know, how long is a piece of string? So are there particular educational needs in particular areas, and that's why they're being spotted or not spotted in other areas? because of either, as I think Josie said, parental not understanding or just accepting. For instance, I know in the Roma community, they're not very interested in hearing aids because there's just an assumption that that's just the way life is. And most hearing aids have to be kept at school because they don't get used at home. And just small examples like that of cultural differences, which we need to tackle to make sure that actually every child in our city gets what is needed for them. So I expect the committee will want you back probably sometime in, I don't know, September, October, because you'll have had your response by then, won't you, from Ofsted, and you'll be able to come in and glow to us about it. So thank you very much. Right, so our next item is the Customer Services Contact Centre Performance Report. And I was going to ask if you'd like to come and sit here. And thank you for waiting. It's because we're keen on everything. You're going to probably have another half hour as well. So committee keenness is written all over us. Right, stop being Andrew and become Paul Taylor.
It did occur to me I could just leave it there and still be Andrew, but probably not.
Take it away.
Excuse me. Right, yeah, there was a report I think came to this committee in October with a contact centre update report. I wrote it, but then I unexpectedly toddled off to hospital for a few days, so it wasn't me actually presenting it. So the report you have in front of you now is looking at Q3 and performance through to the 28th of February, looking at contact centre performance and proposals for action. As I've said in the report, the performance has improved during March, which isn't reflected in this report, but it's clearly still nowhere where we need it to be, nowhere near that. The housing and corporate strands have improved substantially, and they're substantially back on track, but the repairs and maintenance and revenues and benefits remain extremely challenging for the reasons set out in the report. So I won't revisit those reasons now, but if people want me to, I happily will. I think in reviewing performance, it's important to acknowledge a few things really. The performance during and the adaptation to the pandemic conditions was fairly astonishing from the contact centre, and obviously we have a lot of people then who then began working from home. They're still working from home now substantially, though we will obviously be bringing people back over the next few months. There is still some residual impact from the pandemic. The 18,000 letters that are referenced in revenues and benefits in the report is an example, but there are a few bits and bobs that still come back on the back of it, and we still have a number of experienced staff who are working on the track and trace team, and we're hoping we'll get them back at the end of March, all things being equal. The other thing that I want to say really is that staff are working really hard and really efficiently in terms of dealing with the calls that are coming through. We concentrate a lot on that because that's the one thing we have really direct control over, and we're satisfied people are doing a really good job. The issues that are reflected in the performance figures you can see are more systemic and cut across a number of services, and I think that's an important point to bear in mind. We also need to be mindful that customer services have had to take some share of the budgetary pain as well. Not perhaps as much as some other services, but we have got savings to make, and we've lost 4 frontline advisor posts up to present. That said, we're trying very much in terms of how we manage the budgetary ask to minimise the effect on the frontline staff, because clearly that's the important bit. So I have set out some improvement measures, ongoing improvement measures in section 5.1 of the report. And what I'll do is pull together a calendar which gives some timelines to that so that everybody can see when those things are going to be happening. Probably worth just mentioning some of them. A key thing for us, and it remains, is improving the relationship with what we shorthand to back office services. So it's that join up between the services on whose behalf we're working and the contact centre. We're always trying to develop better liaison but that needs some more work, and that's fundamental, I think, to improving the performance. There are a number of technological innovations that will help to improve the customer journey, including things such as live chat and the use of natural language. They're all going to be piloted over the next few weeks. You'll see that we're looking to cross-skill two of the teams, because we have a situation where the housing team have been performing very well for quite a period of time. The repairs team have been struggling for the reasons that are set out in the report. The new repair system means that we can fairly easily start skilling up the housing team to take repairs calls as well, and that at least gives us that flexibility to try and move people to where the demand is as and when we need to. And again, you'll see that we are now creating a contact centre performance manager post, which we're currently working up, which will be somebody who will be, I mean, everybody's focused on performance, but somebody will have much more specific job descriptions around that. I'd also I'd ask members to note the details, findings and recommendations from the LGA, Local Government Association peer review that took place in December. I was pleased that the review does acknowledge the work that's been done to improve the customer journey, but you'll see that review identified the need for more collective ownership of a customer ethos and a breaking down of the siloed approach, which again comes back to that back office point. There were some potential quick wins identified. A lot of those are already in train. The other useful thing that came from that is the LGA came back at the end of the review and said we could have some grant funding available to cover something that you can't pay for without the grant funding. We very much want to get a customer portal in place, which means that people will be able to track what's happening with the issues that they're presenting with. So if somebody rings up and says, orders a repair, for example, they'd be able to track on the portal what's happening with that. And that should take out a lot of those calls that we get with people ringing us back to say, well, I've reported this and nothing's happened, so what's going on with it? So luckily the LGA have agreed to go along with that. They're putting the money across. That will part fund a portal, because we went back and said, is it okay if it's something we could afford if we had some money towards it, and they've agreed with that. That will take a while to come into effect though, probably towards the end of the year at best, I think, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done for preparation for that. It would also be helpful if people could note that the work that we've been doing with the Our Council Transitional Committee. We've had lots of sort of workshops and discussions about what can be improved within the contact centre, and we're now working towards agreeing the elements of what would make that customer ethos, which the LGA have quite rightly said we need, and an accompanying programme will work with that. I would say, I'm going to say it, we're all very aware that the current situation is not satisfactory. It's not anywhere near where we need it to be. There's a lot of work going on to change it. There's a lot of focus around trying to enable better online contact with the council, and I'd take the point absolutely that online contact isn't going to work for everybody, we know that. But if we can get all the people who want to contact us online and make that journey smoother, that will clear the way then, so we can deal with more of the people who do need to contact us directly. These aren't within my gift, but it's important you know about them. The SCC website is being replaced, and there's also a project ongoing around updating and replacing web forms. So it starts off by the first phase. You won't notice any difference on looking at the forms, but the stuff going on in the background is changing, and then we're looking more to change the forms sort of themselves as well. And there's a correspondence project which is going to start in May, which at least means people will get an email confirming what they've ordered and when they can expect something to happen. So again, that should take some of the pressure off. And then the portal, when we finally get it, will take all of that a stage further effectively. Finally, just to say really that we welcome further member involvement. We welcome ideas, we welcome suggestions. We'd be grateful if members want to get involved in testing some of the new sort of innovations and seeing how well they work. The other thing, now that the restrictions are lifted, is that we can now get back into inviting members to come in and listening to calls, which I do very much recommend. We've got 3 of the Our Council Transitional Committee coming in next week, so that's the first time we've done that since the last 2 years. And we tend to find that's really, really helpful for members to sort of to see and hear firsthand what's happening when people are coming through. So please do take us up on that. And then I'm sure people are going to have some questions.
I think we just might. Angela.
Thank you, Paul, for that. And can I vouch for doing that? Because I did it when I was first elected, and I sat with callers, with the call handlers, and it was very, very interesting to see how they did it. There are several kind of things that I want to say and I want to ask. Obviously, the reason why the customer service has such a high volume of calls is because there are problems in other areas. And that is, you know, the underlying problem is that there are parts of the council where there are long-standing problems, one of them being repairs, for example, and therefore people cannot get what they've asked for or what they need, and they need to contact the council in some way. And then because of the volume and because of the fact that the technology is not up to it, let's be frank, people are having to wait for a long time. So when your line manager was here back in the autumn, he was really kind of drilled by us on this. You know, I don't think he had a particular pleasant time when he was here with us that time. What concerns me, and this was raised last time, is the fact that this is our front door as Sheffield City Council. So the impression that people get by trying to contact the council on a website that is like a maze, where you can't find stuff even when you know it's there and when you've already found it some other time. And, you know, I've been saying this, I've been on this committee for a long time. Since I've been on this committee, which is since I was elected, is that, you know, it doesn't seem to improve at pace, and it's nearly 3 years later, and we're hearing again that the website is going to be changed. And to be frank, I will believe it when I see it. And my concern is also about the lovely staff that are in the customer service that have to take these calls from people who've been waiting for 33 minutes 19, and you know, people will be irate because they've had to spend a long time on the phone, sometimes for very pressing reasons, you know, when they've already probably struggled for months and for years. So I'm just, you know, and we mentioned this last time, it just feels like we have our front door, and our front door's got barbed wire, and it's got mines, and it's not the fault is not the porter who's there to say welcome to our house. It's because other people have put those hurdles. And so it is really concerning, because the impression that we give to our residents is that we are not there for them when they need us, because when people are calling customer service, it might be, you know, the final thing that they're trying to do after they've already struggled because people in repairs said they would go on one day and then they didn't turn up, or they turned up but didn't knock on the door, they just put a card. I've had this very week, I can give you 4 examples of 4 bits of casework this week that is all to do with services not going the way they should, and rather than ring customer service, they've emailed or called me. So I've saved you a job there. So it's, you know, you get the wrath here, but the reason why your staff and customers get the anger is because people are waiting for a long time, and it's too complicated to get hold of us as an authority. It's, you know, it's mostly repairs, but sometimes it's housing, and it's not repairs, it's housing. So that's my second example from this week. They can't get hold of people, or they've got confused, they don't understand it, or whatever. Or it's a repair that has been reported 3 years ago, and a complaint has been put in, and everything has gone lost. And it's 3 years ago, before I was elected, but I've only just found out, and nobody knows where this thing has gone for such a long time. So it's you know, we get, the case where we get is when people are really, really, really struggling sometimes. So I wonder how many calls we're not answering, because we are answering sometimes at the moment in Q4, so up to the 28th of February, 64% of the calls were answered. So what happened to the other 36%? Was there something that was really urgent that we didn't pick up? So, you know, it is concerning, and it's not just about putting it right, but putting it right at pace, because, you know, the bar is very low at the moment, and we don't want it just satisfactory, we want it excellent. So this is not satisfactory, but satisfactory is not enough for the front door of Sheffield City Council.
Could I just come back on a few of those? Yeah. Probably one of the things to say is we need to move to more of a sort of quality indicator as well, because some of it is about that whole thing about getting it right first time, so we haven't got people ringing back again and again. And at the moment we're very driven by a quantity indicator. So what I send out to you goes, we should be doing 85% and we're only doing 70% or whatever. When in fact it should be more about the quality thing, about actually if we're getting it right first time, the back office teams are all getting it right first time, then we're not going to have people coming round again and again. And I think that's sort of where we need to get to. I take the point about some of the things still being around 3 years later, but we do now have a new phone system which came in sort of during the pandemic, and that's enabled stuff like live chat. Now live chat I think will help. The website, you're right, needs improving, we all know that. But if we have something which means people can jump off from the website, so the sort of thing that says, you know, still not finding what you want, then, you know, chat to one of our agents, and that's one of the things that we can then bring in, so we've got something. And then if we can update the website as well, which we're going to do, then the two together should help. In terms of the LJ review, that's helped in terms of highlighting those back office issues. You know, there are people in this room who know that I go on and on and on about those back office issues times many. And it's been useful to have the LGA sort of underlining that. I think that there is a fresh impetus across some of those other services now to have that dialogue and to get to where we need to be. In terms of repairs, the new system they brought in is good. It's had some teething problems which are reflected a bit in those statistics. And there still needs to be the right levels of service going on behind it as well. You know, so it can sort of make sure this person's there and it's all being done in a logical way. But actually, if people don't turn up or people get a card saying you weren't in and they're ringing up and going, hang on, I was in, that sort of thing, that all needs to be got hold of, obviously. In terms of the missed calls, yeah, well, what we don't know, what we don't track at the moment is how many of the people, how many of all those calls that we missed are the same people ringing back again and again and again. And I know people do. You know, I went to see my dentist the other week and she was sort of going, oh, well, I've rung them 3 times and, you know, couldn't get through. So, you know, it's people ringing back again and again because they can't get through. And absolutely take that point about the irate people. What typically happens when people call the contact centre is when they get through, they start by having a bit of a go about the fact they've not been able to get through. They then speak with the advisor. And very typically by the end of the call, they go, I'm really sorry I had to go at you. You've done what I needed you to do and thank you, it's been great. It's just such a pain having to wait so long to be able to get through. So I absolutely echo that point.
Councillor Patrick.
I've got lots of sympathy for the people answering these calls because they must take a lot of grief. But having said that, I think what's frustrating, I think again we've got to look at the percentages, and you know when you look at 43% answer, that's 57% not. You're 41% over the page, so there's 59% not. And they're just drop calls. And again, your average is an average. So some of these people, when they come through and they talk to us, some of the times that they're telling us that they have to wait, and they're the people that are fortunate enough to have an unlimited contract on the phone, that they can probably put it on speakerphone, wander off, do something else, and just carry it around with them and do other things, and it's not a financial cost to them. There will be people out there who are on fixed incomes have pay-as-you-go phones, and they're probably putting the phone down and ringing back because it would cost them an absolute fortune that they've not got to hang on to have the call answered. And so it's really difficult because I don't want to have a go, but I've heard everything you said, but it's about, and this is what we said last time when Mark Bennett was here. It's like it's the frustrating thing is it's always going to get fixed later, and it's just what I would like to see is some sort of plan that says we're going to do this by this date, and we've calculated it will have this impact, so that you've got, so we're not being promised jam tomorrow, but we're being promised a route out of this, and we should be able to see sequential improvements on this going forward so that we can see a continuous improvement. And it's really difficult because we have had the pandemic, and the thing about first point staff is they are, although you've talked about training and training needs, they are generally very well trained, and they are headhunted by a lot of other departments in the council. So we do recognise that, and it's one of those things, if you're going to train them up and everybody else wants them, you're going to lose them. So I think, and again, if you've got the budget, there's not a lot you can do with the pay structure, because if they then get the skills that can be better rewarded somewhere else, then why wouldn't they go? So, but I think the thing for us is we do need to get to the percentage answered. We do need to get those average waiting times down. And I've been a councillor for 8 years. I worked for the authority for nearly 25, and of that time, I can't even remember how long I was involved with First Point when it was first becoming First Point, so it's probably 20, 30 years ago, way back. Well, it would have been about early, whenever they moved away from the town hall egg box to wherever they were, down to Atlas Court, and all the time we've been promised updated systems. I remember, and computer systems that were going to give you from cradle to grave information on a person, so that it would never have to repeat a single piece of information to the council ever again. And I just wonder if it's worthwhile putting IT in one room, you're training people in the same room, and just saying when, and getting an honest answer on when is the IT system actually going to deliver what they've promised us for decades, and when is and I've been in there, and I've seen the televisions with how many calls waiting and all the rest of it, and it's there. And when they moved away from the two women in G40 or whatever it was into joining a thing, we were promised that this, you know, it's all going to be in one place and it's all going to be wonderful. I suppose really what I want to know is, rather than just giving us a rosy picture for the future, can we have fixed targets of what's going to be done and what's going to be achieved? And I do understand the business about the new housing system, which is really new and sorting out its teething problems. I do know the repair service has got a new IT system, and I thought it was going to be more or less up and running, but obviously they're still building it as they go. And I think for all of us to get a true picture of when the housing repair service computer is going to do everything that it says it's going to do to deliver what you want, and when is the housing side of it going to be able to do what it says it's going to do? Because then you can just look after everybody else, because the housing side of it, everybody's supposed to be able to just log on there and see where they are on the housing list and where everything is in regards to that. They're supposed to be able to make the rent payments through it. We should be able to see an account that shows all the rent and what they've paid and all the rest of it. The repairs side of it, when it's up and running, everybody should be able to book their own repairs. They should be able to monitor their own appointments. They're already starting to get texts to say that your repairman's, like everybody else has been doing for decades, they're getting text to say your repairman's going to be here at 12 o'clock, or your repairman can't be there at 12 o'clock today, is 4 o'clock tomorrow good enough, or whatever. And I think we just need to see that, because whilst this is fine, it doesn't give us a step change that takes us to where we want to be. Chair, am I asking for too? I mean, that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see how it goes. And I know it's not, it can't be written in stone because it's IT systems. But if worst case scenario, we're going to have this by this date, we're not all expecting it to be done by January, July 1st or whatever. We've got a realistic picture of when all the systems and all the back work's done, and when all the teething problems are out, so that we can actually say to people, we're really sorry, but this is what we're doing, and get the people down. And it's just as well as giving the average waiting time, if we could have the best and the worst, because I think until we actually address what the worst waiting time is rather than the average, we're not getting a true picture of what people are actually having to put up with. So I'm sorry if that's sort of all quite negative, but in a way it's positive, because at least if we're dealing with the reality, we can tell people what the reality of the improvements are as well. Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I'll try and keep this brief. Yes, absolutely. In terms of a plan, very happy to pull all of that together. I can circulate that out to everybody. It'll take a week or two, but we get that out to everybody. Happily come back to a future meeting, and we can, you know, I'll happily sort of take you through the detail of that. I get that's what's needed, something that firms it all up. Yeah, in terms of better IT interface, getting everybody in the same room. What was interesting in the LJ review was they said you need to stop being led by what IT are saying is available and start saying to IT, this is what we need. And if I'm being absolutely honest, I think we've fallen into that trap a little bit in terms of, oh, we can do this now, great, let's see what we can do with it, rather than us actually, you know, making the noise to IT and saying, well, actually what we need is this. And I think we're moving more in that direction. Absolutely take your point about people having to wait and it costing people. I mean, I've been back with the council now for more or less exactly 5 years, and when I came back, everybody was talking about channel shift. Everybody's always talking about channel shift, and trying to get people more online. But I think that there has been a move towards that now. It's interesting because obviously we're going to be sort of reopening First Point in about 5-6 weeks, fully reopening it rather than where it is now. And it'd be interesting to see how many people have actually gone down that online route by necessity. The pandemic's meant more people have got more comfortable using the online stuff. But then we come back into the whole thing about how can we make it so that people want to do the online stuff. The number of times the advisors will say to people, you could have done this online, and I'll say, yeah, I've tried that, but it didn't work, and that's why I'm ringing you. So if we can get more people, get that online route working more smoothly, then that clears the way then for the people who really do need to ring us up. And yeah, nice that you mentioned the one thing that I could probably go on for an hour if I had the chance, about the fact, yeah, we train people, and we train people really well. In fact, we train them so well that then they move on to better paid jobs in other teams. And that's a constant thing. And actually, that was one of the things that did go away in the pandemic. Through the first 6 months or so of the pandemic, nobody went anywhere. Everybody stayed where we needed them to be. But then now, as we've started to sort of come out more, once again, we're seeing that churn going on and people moving on to other teams. We can put in a rolling recruitment, and we are doing, but it forever means that we're bringing new people in and recruiting. We've just done a load of people this week. So yeah, that's sort of one of the challenges. And the good news is it enriches the council. We know that really good people are going off and, you know, working in other bits of the council, but it means they're not working for us.
Councillor Curran.
Thank you. So I'm quite aware that the other two questioners were sort of apologising if they were being a bit too harsh. I mean, for me, I'm just really sceptical. Back when I was cabinet member, the new website that we brought in, the current one, was going to do all the things you say the next website's going to do. It clearly hadn't. We talked about a whole bunch of different measures that were going to reduce demand so that the numbers would all come down. They haven't. we introduced rolling recruitment at one point. We were permanently recruiting to the contact centre. It didn't sort the problem out. So I can't see how the same solutions that we tried, I'm going to say 6, 7, 8 years ago now, which makes me feel like I've been here quite a long time, are going to produce any better results. I mean, the big difference back at that time is, in fairness, the Rev and Ben's numbers were actually worse. But the difference was I could phone Capita up, call them in, we'd have an argument, and they would have to justify why things were so bad. Part of the solution to it being so bad was bringing it back in-house, having a contact centre that had all the phone numbers under one roof, so you could have someone, theoretically, pick up a housing call or a Revs and Ben's call or whatever other council call, because they'd all be able to do it. And it would be much more flexible, and because of that, people would be able to deal with more volume. It wouldn't be sort of siloed, this person deals with that call, this one deals with the other, and that hasn't happened. So rather than having discussions about, at the end of the day, we need to pick up the phone, and we need to pick it up quickly, and we're not doing either of those things. And I think we need to have a fundamental discussion, less around tinkering with this bit of tech and that bit of an approach. I think we should be asking the fundamentals of, do all the phone numbers under one roof, has that worked? Or should we move on and try something else? Is it right that we're doing this? Or should we look to another provider? And I think we really need to get into those fundamentals. On the staffing issue, if people are coming and moving on, to me it's saying we're not paying them enough. That's classic. You come in, you get a job, you get some knowledge and skills in different areas, you move on. Why is the contact centre not attractive? Because contact centres don't pay very well. If that's the big issue in staffing, people coming in and moving on, let's stop just permanently recruiting more people to come in and move on and try and get people to stay. Pay is the obvious thing that stands out in my mind. There's possibly other things, I don't know. But I think we need to stop having this tinkering around the edge discussion that we've had for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years and get into some big fundamentals, because it's not working, it hasn't worked, and I'm not convinced what we're talking about today is going to do much more than shift things around the edges. If we look at, okay, Revs and Ben's Q4 to end of February, it's only fractionally worse than Q3, but the corporate contact centre's more than twice as bad in terms of average waiting time. Calls answered are significantly worse. The council housing line's worse in quarter. The trend isn't getting better, And it's easy to say, oh, the pandemic, this and that and the other. It was a problem before the pandemic, it's a problem during the pandemic, it's a problem now. It's not going to not be a problem because the pandemic's over. And I think, for me, we just got to stop tinkering around the edges and ask some really big questions and try and find some answers to them, because otherwise we're going to keep having people there in poverty, struggling to try and sort out their Revs and Bens, having to pay for 30-odd minutes of a phone call, if they're average, 57 minutes, Angela said in one case of hers. I've got people that contact me as a local councillor. I can email people in the team and say, can you just phone this person because it's ridiculous. Most people don't do that. They don't contact me, and they're suffering not just poor customer service. If we were a company, people would be leaving us in droves. If we were a bank, their accounts would be with other banks right now. That's the problem. It's because we've got a monopoly on the market that we say people being dissatisfied with the level of service is okay, picking up 41% of calls is okay, making people wait 34 minutes on average is okay. It's because they can't go anywhere else. If we were commercial, they would have gone, and we'd be in big trouble.
I'm actually going to ask Eugene to answer that one, because Eugene is our acting chief exec and is over all that. And I thought, why not? You sit there, Paul.
Sure. I actually think there's quite a lot. Thank you, Josie, and what you said about kind of what's an achievable, realistic plan. I think that's a good point. We're talking about that ourselves, because there is no quick fix. This is a massively multifaceted organisation that does not always act as one. And Paul sat here today and has answered questions before where he's kind of at the end of an accountability point, and I think he recognised this, where There are a series of things within the rest of the council that need to change. And a lot of that, and partly speaking to Ben's point, I think a lot of those points are cultural about us joining that up. It's not just about systems. Changing the website isn't about an IT system. It's about people getting, it's Paul's back office point, it's about getting multifaceted people across the organisation to work and think in a way that thinks of the customer first and thinks as one organisation. And we've not been good enough about that, that's right. I think that is the big difference, back to Ben's question. That's hard to achieve because it's cultural and we're not good enough, and I think that's what we've got to get right, as well as the system. So I think it's not, I don't think it's about tinkering, I think it's about grinding through some difficult issues but having a clear and realistic plan about how we can do that. Because to take an example, we're absolutely right. We insourced the service because it wasn't good enough with Capita. There is still a clear improvement plan about actually what we've effectively done is bring all the back office Capita staff back. There's still back office staff there that is not joined up enough to the front office. There was a plan to do that, and this is a genuine bit. I mean, it sounds like excuses, but the pandemic delayed that because there are some serious issues in there because we effectively at the moment have a two-tier workforce. As soon as we make that change, we will have a big significant issue about sorting out 2P. That takes some doing. It needs sorting out. That plan was delayed because of everything that happened to the pandemic and everybody being taken on to other things. And I know it's easy to talk about that, but that has had a big impact on what it's been able to change in that service and structure. I know that issue will be picked up this year, but that's going to take some time to work through as well because it's going to lead to some complex HR issues. So it's about having a clear plan and perhaps being clear and firm, because I think I'm really conscious of Paul's position here. He's answering questions about partly the whole organisation. I think if we do what Josie suggested, it's easier to see the moving parts and who's accountable for which bits and which bits need to think together. And I think that should then give everyone some more confidence. And I understand the frustration. You know, I feel it too. It's not good enough. I think the answer about it is as well about kind of comparison to commercial companies is we cannot choose our customers actually. And actually at various points we get inundated because of various things that are not entirely under our control as well, particularly as happens when, and it's happened again, the government announces another initiative without giving us the detail of that, and it creates we've had another announcement in the budget about household support, and it creates an expectation that it's in place because that's been put there before we've got time to react to it, and we're dealing with that partly as well. But I think that plan about the moving parts, and that is not just Paul, I think that's something about working with other teams about getting that so that we can be clear what are the bits that need to move in what order in order to make that significant change. There won't be some magic wand or significant step change that changes this overnight. We need to be realistic about that, but also accountable about what are the things that need to change along the way. And I think Paul needs support in the rest of the organisation. We need to get it to make sure we can show that to everyone, not just what we have here, which is still a little bit focusing on the end point of the customer service numbers. And I find that a little frustrating as well. And I think that's what we've got to get in place.
No, thanks for that. I mean, I personally just disagree. I think we need to start having those big discussions. But I mean, that's what that is. And another frustration is the fact that we talk externally about different bits of the council to people. So with council housing, when you're talking about repairs and issues, they will talk about issues with the contact centre over there, this, that and the other. And rather than there being sort of that collective ownership of that customer and their customer journey or the service and seeing it as like different bits of the same thing, there's well, you know, if the contact centre sorted out their bits, repairs would be fine, and there would be, if repairs sorted out their bits, the contact centre would be fine. And, you know, there's that, we're actually one service, even if we're completely separately run, and we just don't have that. So,
sorry, I agree. That was my point about culture. Absolutely agree. I think that's one of the biggest problems, has been one of the biggest problems, and we need to fix it.
I guess what I'm not clear on is how we get to that point. So today we're talking about, and obviously, you know, Paul's here to talk about what Paul's here to talk about, and I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think it's your fault, Paul. I think it's much bigger than Paul's service. And that's probably the discussion that we need to have next time, rather than Paul coming back and saying, here are some figures that aren't going to be very different to these, in my view. Hopefully Paul can prove us wrong. But, you know, I think we need to have the people that can have the bigger discussion, because I think that's really what we need to have. But thanks for that iterative process, got me to what I was trying to say, really. Thanks.
Now then, Josie and Maroof, who've delighted us with their long contributions, want to come back in. So it's going to be brief, isn't it?
It's going to be very brief, and it's going back on that. I think we're absolutely right. It's not just Paul, and that's what I'm saying. We want Paul in the same room as the IT person, in the same room as the repairs person, in the same room as the housing people, which are different from the repairs people, and they've both got brand new computer systems that are coming online that will make it better, but we're just seeing Paul. We haven't got and I think I said this at a previous meeting, because the new computers only came in November and they're still building the systems and having teething troubles, and that's what we need to see. We need to see the connectivity of how they're working to come together, so then we can understand that, but not to excuse it, but to make it so that we can audit it coming along all those steps. Because if we can't see it, we can't audit it. And that's what we need. We need to be able to not necessarily jump up and down, because I've worked with these people, it's not necessarily jump up and down on the reds, but to say, we can see your computer system, you tell us when that's going to be, Mr. Repairs. Mr. Housing, that has only just been able to look at repairs, would you believe, in the 21st century, would then be able to tell us, this is when we're sorting ourselves out. And then you could have Mr. Revs and Benz at the side of that telling us what they're doing. And then that all feeds in. And I think the problem we've got is that's all back there and we're not auditing that. We're auditing Paul. And that's all that's what I'm saying. We need that information and to see how they synchronise together.
I'll be extremely brief, Chair. I was going to ask lots of questions about the numbers here, but I'm not going to do that anymore, simply because I think there needs to be a fundamental change. And I actually feel sorry for Paul, sat here trying to defend these numbers, because they're abysmal, some of them. Let's be perfectly honest. What we're trying to do is fix an engine that's actually broken, and has been for a number of years. And I've been on this committee for 4 years now, and I've had these numbers brought to us, and we as members have challenged these numbers time and time again. And the fact is that this needs to be done at a fundamentally higher level. And I agree with Councillor Agenzio earlier. This is our front door, and to get through the front door, we need to come through so many barriers now. It's incredible. I mean, I've even tried ringing Revs and Benz. I mean, it actually cuts out on you sometimes. And planning, you can't get through to either. I mean, that's just micro stuff. I think the macro stuff needs to be dealt with. And I think we as a group seem to be agreeing on this, that we need a much more fundamental look at this, because I've had an association, just as Josie has, for over 25, 30 years, and we've been talking about it for that long. And I just can't get it in. I can't understand why, when people were able to walk into the town hall, they seem to get a much better service than now that we've got all this modern technology and everybody can contact each other 24/7, and we seem to have got it a lot worse. So I think we just need to rip up everything we've got and start all over again. And that's something we have to do, because we all of us have to keep having to answer to this all the time, saying we can't get through. And when you do get through, they are very good, but sometimes they have to repeat the story a million times. And if you've had a council summons, and people seem to be really scared, they want to speak to somebody at the other end to sort of confide in and say, look, this is the problem that I'm suffering from, and they're having sleepless nights and all sorts of things because they can't get through to anybody. And the next time they get through, it's completely somebody else. But let's start afresh, is my opinion.
Right. Well, I think Eugene being here and listening to all this is what's been helpful this evening. Not that you weren't aware, but perhaps just hearing all this stuff once again from us is helpful. I'd like to thank Paul for coming, because everybody says it's not your fault, so it obviously isn't, but you're the person that gets it in the neck. So what are you going to do, Eugene?
So thank you. Yeah, and what I'll understand the points, and what I'll do is take away to get something back that's a more holistic answer to that than Paul being sat here answering for the organisation.
Is that okay with everybody? Angela's not saying anything. Angela's asleep. Okay, thank you. That was a good item. It is what it is. If we move on to our next item, which is the annual Housing Ombudsman Complaints Report, I'm not going to ask you to speak to this. I think we ought to just note that the Ombudsman sending a report like this, rather than one which actually explains what they've been doing, pandemic or no pandemic, is not especially good. And just for once, it feels quite good for us to be able to say, what on earth is the Ombudsman doing, rather than the other way around from them. So it hasn't even got all the housing associations which we have in Sheffield, and I don't know whether that's because they're so perfect they haven't had any complaints, which I find very hard to believe. But I think we're just going to note that and sort of say Ombudsman could do better. If that's all right with everybody. And with that, we move on to our last report, which is the work programme, which, if that's all right with you, because won't be here. Jay, do you want to say anything about the work report, or? Right. Okay, so we want the SEND report to come back. And did we say about October time? Because we thought by then, ooh, Alison. Okay, so we've got Eugene's report and the SEND report, and then all our, ooh, Angela.
We have another item on our... oh, okay, no, sorry. I think it's just something that was provided to us because of a question that I asked in the pre-meeting about the contingency plan for something that's going to happen at the end of the month, I think.
Right. Well, we're all gravely disappointed, and I'm looking at you now, Eugene, about the fact that Dave is leaving us, and how he was allowed to leave, we don't know. But we would, Dave has written a note, which I think people have had, which explains what is going to happen next after Dave has gone, and how we're having to have how many people to replace you, Dave? Yeah. 4 people to replace 1 officer. This is what we need. So, do you want to just explain it quickly to us, Dave?
Thank you very much, Chair. The Chair and other members asked me just to pull a paper together to say where my various duties are going. Just for members of the public watching, we're not having 4 new people to replace 1 person. We're actually letting me retire, deleting my post and splitting my responsibilities amongst existing colleagues largely. The one colleague who is new is sitting to my right here, Jane, who's taking over as the Assistant Director in charge of accounting. But she's effectively replacing another colleague who's also going as well, but taking on some of my responsibilities. Ryan, who's the Director of Finance and Commercial Services, will become directly the lead for internal audit, which allows internal audit to report at a level higher in the organisation, which I think is technically a better solution. For those of you who will recall, that's one of the areas where we get marked down on when we get our external peer reviews of internal audit, and they like internal audit to report in directly. My other duties have been split between a couple of other colleagues as well. So hopefully everything will get picked up the committee quite rightly wanted some assurance that nothing's been dropped, and this paper does that for you. So I'm happy to take any questions on it.
Sorry to have asked you to do another report for us. I only asked on Tuesday, so thank you for providing that for us.
And so I'm assuming you're agreeing the work programme with the addition of those 2 additional reports, in which case I'll just say thank you. You've been a lovely committee, and you've been very indulgent of an old lady. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a better chair next year. Thank you all.